I pressed my mop against the floor of sub-level 4 and listened to the station breathe. That is what I called it. Breathing. The low, rhythmic hum of the thermal regulation systems moving warm air through the corridors. The soft click of pressure valves doing their slow, patient work. The vibration in the metal floor that you only felt if you stood still long enough. Most of the crew never stood still long enough. Most of the crew had places to be. I had floors to mop. My name is Mira Solano. I am 43 years old, and for the last 3 years I have been the only human aboard Ketharuna Station, a deep space waypoint orbiting a gas giant at the edge of conclave territory. My official title, as listed on the station manifest, is Environmental Maintenance Specialist. The VEL technician named Chori, who was 20 years old and bioluminescent in the way that very confident young people sometimes are, had a simpler name for me. He called me the cleaning woman, always in VEL, always just quietly enough that I was not quite supposed to hear. I heard everything. I just chose, very carefully, what to respond to. That morning, Administrator Velchorin walked past me 4 times. I counted. The first time, I was mopping near the entrance to the common mess hall. The second time, I was wringing the mop out near the food station. The third and fourth times, I was moving a slow and deliberate path toward the corridor that led to sub-level 7. He was tall, the way all VEL are tall, with that particular kind of posture that comes from believing, without needing to examine the belief, that the world arranges itself around you. He did not look down. He never looked down. I was background, and background does not require acknowledgement. That was fine. I had learned, a long time ago, that being background has its advantages. I reached sub-level 7 around the middle of the morning shift, the same time I always did. The corridor here was older than the rest of the station. You could feel it in the walls, in the slightly different grade of the floor plates, in the way the lighting was just a shade warmer. At the far end of the corridor was a heavy door, sealed with a manual bolt and a code panel that had not been listed in the active systems registry for at least a decade. The sign above it read, "Boiler Access, Maintenance Personnel Only." The station's automated records showed the door as dormant, no entry logs, no heat signatures registered as human-generated. I pressed my palm flat against the metal and listened. Then I mopped the floor in front of it and moved on. I want to be honest about what the others thought of me, because they were not cruel about it. They were simply accurate, given what they could see. The VEL believed that humans mopped floors out of something close to biological instinct, a grooming behavior carried over from our evolutionary history. They found it touching. Several of them had mentioned, in conversations they believed were private, that they respected the way I had adapted my primitive drives to a modern environment. The Graer had timed my cleaning routes and calculated that I maintained a consistent efficiency rating of 94.7%, which they logged with quiet approval. The Thasine, who were gaseous beings living inside sealed suits, and who were relentlessly, exhaustingly kind, occasionally floated beside me in companionable silence, believing I was meditating. I was not meditating, but I did not tell them that. Administrator Velchorin believed I was harmless. He had arrived at this conclusion in my first week and had not revisited it since. In his defense, I had given him very little reason to. The truth began 3 years ago, in my first week on the station, when I was still learning which corridors echoed and which ones swallowed sound. I had been assigned sub-level 7 on my 3rd day, given a mop and a manifest that listed the boiler room as inactive. I had opened the boiler room because I was new and thorough, and the door was there. What I found was not dramatic. It was not a disaster, not yet. It was something worse. It was a system that was failing so slowly, so quietly, so far below the sensitivity thresholds of the automated monitors, that no alarm would ever sound until the failure was complete. The primary thermal regulation coupling was 60 years old. It had been installed with the wrong specification fitting, a mistake from the original construction that no one had caught because the system had compensated for it from the beginning. The compensation had worked. For 60 years it had worked, in the way that a person can walk with a stone in their shoe for an afternoon. The body adjusts, the gait shifts, and everything seems fine until the blister opens. The automated systems read the compensation as nominal. The logs said nominal. I stood in the boiler room for a long time, reading the heat signatures on the walls, and I understood what the logs did not say. I went back to my quarters. I found graph paper, I drew what I had seen. The next morning, I mopped the floors. I want to explain why I did not report it, but I am not sure the explanation is as clean as I would like it to be. At first, I thought I would. I spent 2 days composing the report in my head, thinking about the right channels, the right language, the right way to present a structural concern to an administration that had assigned the concern's discoverer a mop. Then I thought about sitting in front of Velchorin and explaining thermal coupling specifications to someone who had walked past me 4 times without looking down. I thought about the way the GRAR engineers spoke to each other in briefings, fluent in conclave engineering standards, confident in the automated systems they had been trained to trust. I thought about the word they would not say but would mean, "The human has found something our systems missed," and I thought that the path from that sentence to actual action was longer than the time the station had. So I went to the boiler room. I found what I needed. The things I used, in that first month, came from storage units that no one had opened in years, salvaged pipe sections, pressure fittings from a decommissioned cargo module, thermal bonding compound from a repair kit that had been on the station longer than any of the current crew. I worked during the sleeping shifts, when the corridors were empty, and the only sounds were the hum of the systems and the distant, patient rotation of the station's outer ring. I worked by the light of a handheld lamp clipped to the nearest pipe. I was not fast, I was careful. By the end of the first month, I had braced the primary coupling. By the end of the third month, I had installed a manual coolant bypass. A simple system, nothing elegant, the kind of thing that any mechanical engineer would recognize as a contingency measure. By the end of the first year, I had rerouted 2 conduits, replaced a pressure valve on level 3 that was drifting toward failure, and begun keeping a notebook. Every entry dated, every measurement logged, every decision explained in plain language, as if I were writing it for someone who would need to understand it without me in the room. The notebook grew. The station held. There was a morning, about 18 months in, when a plasma conduit on level 3 vented. A microburst, small and fast. The kind of thing that happens when a valve has been running just slightly outside tolerance for just slightly too long. Chori was standing in the adjacent corridor. I was mopping the floor 15 feet away, and I had been watching that valve for 6 weeks, and I had already replaced the pressure regulator on the downstream side, so that when the burst came, and I knew it was coming, it would vent away from the occupied corridor rather than toward it. Chori felt the heat on the wrong side of the wall, and went pale in the way Vel go pale, the light going out of his skin. He filed a report. The automated system logged it as a minor pressure event, non-critical. He never knew. I kept mopping. I want to say that I was at peace with the invisibility, and mostly I was. But there were nights in the boiler room when the work was slow and the station was very quiet, and I thought about what I was doing and why, and the honesty of those thoughts was not always comfortable. I had started this because the station needed it, and no one else was going to do it. That was true, but there was something else underneath the truth, something about the work itself, about the particular satisfaction of understanding a broken thing so completely that you could hold it together with your own hands. I am not a person who can walk past a fault and leave it alone. I have tried. I cannot. Whether that is a virtue or simply a fact about me, I have never been able to decide. The notebook did not care either way. I kept writing. The coupling failed on a Tuesday. Not my patchwork, the original. The 60-year-old fitting that I had calculated had 4 to 6 weeks of functional life remaining. It had 2. I was in the boiler room when I felt it go. A change in vibration, a drop in pressure that the room communicated through the floor before any sensor registered it. I stood very still for 3 seconds, checking my own understanding against everything I knew about the system, making sure I was right. I was right. Without intervention, the coolant cascade would reach thermal runaway in 6 to 8 hours. The conclave maintenance vessel was 12 weeks away. The automated emergency protocols began their sequence, and above me, through the ceiling, I could hear the station wake up wrong, the specific frequency of alarm that means everyone is awake and almost no one knows what to do. I did not go upstairs. I opened the notebook to the section I had written for this, then I went to work. It is difficult to describe what it is like to fix something that only you fully understand, in a room where no one can see you, while the world above you moves toward panic. It is not dramatic, from the inside. It is quiet and specific, and it requires that you trust every decision you made in the months before, every measurement you took, every judgment call you logged in plain handwriting on graph paper by lamplight. I trusted them. I had to. They were all I had, and they were enough. The manual bypass held, the cascade stabilized, the thermal readings evened out, slowly, the way a person's breathing evens out after a long run. I closed the notebook. I picked up my wrench. I walked out into the corridor. Velchorin was there, along with half the senior staff and Chori, who was holding a conclave engineering manual in both hands, with the expression of someone who has been running very fast in the wrong direction. They all looked at me. I was carrying a wrench and a coolant-stained notebook, and I realized, still wearing my environmental maintenance specialist badge. I said, "In Vel," because it seemed right to speak to them in the language they trusted most. "The thermal cascade is stabilized. You have approximately 72 hours before you will need a proper engineering crew in there. I have left notes." Then I walked back toward my mop. They made me come to the briefing room. I sat for 6 hours. Chori took notes. He has very neat handwriting, for someone with cilia instead of fingers, and I walked them through 3 years of a notebook, every entry, every decision, every repair, every moment when I had seen something and chosen to fix it rather than report it, and I watched their bioluminescence shift through colors I did not have names for. The Graer were very quiet. The Thassin swayed in their suits. Velchorin sat at the head of the table and looked at me with an expression I could not read, which was new. I had learned to read most of their expressions. He asked why I had not reported any of it through official channels. I said, "With respect, Administrator, you walked past me 4 times the morning this started. I had a mop. There was not a channel." He was quiet for a long time after that. The week that followed was strange. Velchorin reclassified my station designation. I was now Systems Integration Specialist, all levels, which I was told was the highest non-administrative classification on the station. The Graer asked for copies of all my notebooks for statistical analysis, and then spent 3 days in visible discomfort, re-evaluating their model of human behavior. One of them found me on level 4 and asked, very carefully, whether I was an outlier. I told him I did not think so. He did not find this reassuring, but he thanked me anyway. The Thassin simply said they had always known something was different about the boiler corridor. When asked what they had known exactly, they could not explain it, but they were pleased to learn they had been correct. Chori found me on level 3, near the conduit, on a morning when I was doing my usual rounds. He stood beside me for a while without speaking. Then he said, in careful standard, "You moved the burst." It was not a question. I said nothing. He said, "I recalibrated my awareness thresholds after that. I have been checking the conduit every shift." I said, "I know. I have seen your marks." He was quiet for a moment, and then he asked if I would show him where else to look. I said yes. We walked the corridor together, and I showed him what to listen for. The boiler room is mine officially now. There are proper lights, a real equipment budget, and a sign on the door that reads M. Solano, Systems Integration. I sit on the floor sometimes and write in the notebook, because old habits are old habits, and because the work is not finished. It is never finished, on a station this old. The systems hum around me. I listen. They still ask me, occasionally, why I did it. They expect something, a principle, a speech, a reason that translates cleanly across species. I have tried to find the right words in 5 languages, and I keep arriving at the same ones, which are simple to the point of embarrassment. It was broken. I was here. I know how to fix things. The station breathes. I write it down. Tomorrow, I will mop the floors.